It was a night like any other at Riverwood Hospital. At least, that's what everyone thought. But for Emily Collins, a young nurse still trying to find her place in the world, that night would change everything forever. Emily, newly hired, was on her usual night shift. At just 24 years old, she was already known for her dedication and empathy, qualities that set her apart from her colleagues. Despite her limited experience, her ability to emotionally connect with patients made her a professional admired by all. She didn't just tend to physical wounds. She cared deeply about the invisible scars, the ones that could only be felt in the heart. Welcome to Heartwarming Tales, your dose of life's beauty. I'm Lucius. Join me as we dive into another captivating story. That night, as Emily went about her usual routines, the hospital's silence was abruptly shattered by the piercing sound of sirens. The emergency room had been activated, and the medical team quickly mobilized. When the paramedics rushed in, they brought with them a young couple who had been in a severe car accident. James, a 25-year-old, was gravely injured, and his girlfriend, Sarah, only 22, was unconscious, trapped in a deep coma. Emily ran to assist the emergency team, her heart racing with adrenaline. James was immediately taken to the operating room, but despite the doctor's tireless efforts, he succumbed to his injuries and passed away a few hours later. The news of James's death fell like a bombshell in the hospital, leaving everyone in a state of silent mourning. Sarah, on the other hand, had suffered severe head trauma and was admitted to the intensive care unit under Emily's care. When Emily saw Sarah for the first time, something inside her shifted. It was as if she was looking at a younger, more defenseless version of herself. Sarah's face, serene despite the circumstances, awakened in Emily a protective instinct she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was because Sarah, with her dormant beauty and fragility, reminded Emily of herself, of her own struggles and losses. Growing up in an orphanage, never knowing the warmth of a family, Emily knew all too well what it felt like to be alone in the world. Now, she found herself responsible for Sarah, determined to care for her with all the love she had always longed to receive. As the days passed, Emily spent more and more time by Sarah's side, talking to her, telling her stories, believing that somehow her voice could reach that young woman in her unconscious state. Emily knew the prognosis for coma patients was not promising, but she refused to give up. She carefully cleaned Sarah's face, adjusted her clothes, and brushed her hair, as if these small gestures could bring back the life that seemed to have escaped Sarah's body. Emily's colleagues at the hospital noticed her dedication and encouraged her, but they also knew she was becoming emotionally involved in a way that could be harmful to her. However, Emily couldn't distance herself. Every time she looked at Sarah, she saw a part of herself, a lost young woman who desperately needed someone to believe in her. The days passed, and despite her colleagues' concerned glances, Emily found herself increasingly drawn to Sarah. Each visit to Sarah's room was a reminder of how much Emily also longed for someone who would never give up on her. But as the bond between them grew stronger, a dark question arose. How far would Emily go to save Sarah? Then, on an especially quiet night, as Emily checked Sarah's vital signs, something unusual happened. It was just a brief moment, almost imperceptible, but enough to make Emily's heart skip a beat. She noticed a slight movement in Sarah's fingers, as if she was trying to hold onto something. Initially, Emily thought it might be an involuntary reflex, but she soon realized that wasn't the case. There was something in Sarah's eyes, even though they were closed, something that suggested an internal struggle, an attempt to communicate, to escape the darkness she was trapped in. Emily felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, hope, and a growing unease. What she had witnessed was not a mere reflex, but a sign of life, an indication that somehow, Sarah was aware of what was happening around her. Emily couldn't explain it, but something inside her told her that Sarah was trying to communicate, something deeper than anyone could imagine. The atmosphere in the intensive care unit seemed quieter than ever. The soft hum of medical equipment was the only sound filling the silence as Emily went about her routine. She spent hours by Sarah's side, a constant and vigilant presence, even when hope seemed scarce. The connection Emily felt with Sarah was undeniable, almost as if their fates were intertwined by an invisible thread of pain and loss. But that week, something began to change. something Emily couldn't ignore. Emily's past was starting to reveal itself through memories she struggled to keep buried. Growing up in an orphanage wasn't easy. The lonely days, the incessant longing for belonging, and the pain of being constantly rejected by families who visited the orphanage left deep scars on her heart. Each child she saw being adopted while she remained alone reinforced the belief that she wasn't worthy of love. This loneliness forced Emily to build emotional barriers, but it also developed in her a deep empathy for those who suffered. It was this empathy that kept her by Sarah's side day after day. Sarah, who now seemed to be the living embodiment of the loneliness Emily knew so well. Sarah, who was alone in a world of darkness and silence, with no one to reach out to her, except, perhaps, Emily. It was on one of those long nights that Emily noticed something different. While adjusting the tubes and checking the monitors, she saw a slight tremor in Sarah's hand. The movement was so subtle it could easily be dismissed as an involuntary reflex, but there was something more. There was a consistency in how it happened, a sort of pattern. Sarah's index finger seemed to move when Emily spoke to her, as if she were responding. Initially, Emily wondered if her mind was playing tricks on her, if her desire to see some sign of life was distorting her perception of reality. But the more time she spent with Sarah, the more these small movements repeated themselves. They were almost imperceptible, but real enough to fuel Emily's hope. She tried to show the doctors, but none of them seemed to take it seriously. To them, it was just Sarah's body reacting randomly, without meaning. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening. She began to talk to Sarah differently, not just as someone trying to comfort a patient, but as if she were truly trying to communicate with her. Emily's bond with Sarah intensified with each passing day. There was a sort of silent dialogue developing between them, an exchange of energy that only Emily seemed to perceive. Every small movement of Sarah, every tiny reaction, seemed like a signal, a response to an unasked question. Emily spent sleepless nights, mentally replaying every detail, trying to understand what these signs meant. Am I getting too involved? What if I'm just seeing what I want to see? But what if she's really trying to tell me something? I can't ignore this. I can't leave her alone, Emily thought, as she gently held Sarah's hand in a moment of silent prayer. And then, on a particularly quiet morning, as the soft light of dawn streamed through the windows of the intensive care unit, Emily noticed something that left her speechless. While helping to change Sarah's clothes, she noticed that Sarah's abdomen was slightly swollen. Something that shouldn't have been there, something that didn't make sense. A chill ran down Emily's spine. She called the attending physician, trying to stay calm, but panic was beginning to take hold of her mind. The doctor arrived quickly, but as soon as he began the examination, his expression shifted from curiosity to astonishment. That swelling wasn't a buildup of gas or fluid. It was something far more unexpected, something that no one could have predicted. Sarah was pregnant. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. The expressions of surprise and disbelief were on everyone's faces. How could this be possible? Sarah had been in a coma since the accident. The father of the child, James, was dead, and the circumstances left no room for doubt. There was no way the pregnancy could have occurred after the accident. A police investigation was immediately launched. The hospital's security cameras were reviewed, medical records checked, but nothing raised any suspicions. It was as if the pregnancy was an unsolvable mystery, an impossibility that, nonetheless, was terrifyingly real. Emily felt as if she were in a nightmare, a mix of confusion and fear that left her breathless. She watched Sarah, who remained motionless, oblivious to the chaos her condition was causing. With her heart racing, Emily knew that what she had discovered would change everything. But how was this possible? And now, what do you think will happen? Will Emily be able to unravel this impossible mystery? And how would you feel if you were in her shoes, dealing with something so inexplicable? Stay with me, because the answers that are coming will leave you breathless. The news of Sarah's pregnancy had shaken Riverwood Hospital like an earthquake. The impossibility of the situation kept everyone in a constant state of perplexity. How could a young woman, in a deep coma since the tragic accident, be carrying a baby? And even more, how could that baby be James's, her deceased boyfriend? It was a mystery that defied not only medical logic, but also human understanding itself. The days following the discovery were filled with anxiety and anticipation. The hospital became a whirlwind of speculation and debate as everyone awaited the DNA test results. Emily, always by Sarah's side, found herself in a spiral of conflicting emotions. There was some relief in knowing the pregnancy wasn't the result of something darker, but at the same time, a deep unease gripped her. How could this be true? It was the question that echoed in her mind day and night. When the result finally came, the tension in the air was almost palpable. The chief doctor gathered the team involved in the case in a small conference room, their expressions heavy with gravity. Emily was there, her heart racing, knowing that what would come next would change everything. The doctor, with a serious look, confirmed. The baby's DNA was indeed James's. An inexplicable miracle, defying all the laws of medicine. The news, which should have been received with joy, brought with it a crushing weight. What should have been a miracle was, in reality, a poisoned blessing. The pregnancy, which initially seemed like a sign of hope, turned out to be a threat to Sarah's life. Due to the prolonged coma and the complications from the trauma, the pregnancy posed a serious risk to her. The doctors were divided. Some believed that the safest course would be to terminate the pregnancy, while others argued that the baby's life should be preserved at all costs. At the center of this emotional whirlwind was Emily, torn between her empathy for Sarah and the desire to do what was right. Emily's nights became sleepless, spent by Sarah's side, caressing her hand, talking to her as if she could hear. "You can overcome this, Sarah. I know you can. You and your baby. You deserve to live." Emily repeated these words like a mantra, her own form of prayer. Sarah's mother, a strong woman who now seemed weighed down by the burden of tragedy, arrived at the hospital the day after the revelation. Her eyes, once bright, now reflected deep pain, but also unwavering determination. She was ready to fight for her grandson's life, even if it meant putting her daughter's life at risk. To her, the baby was the last connection she had with James, the last spark of hope amid the devastating grief. "This baby is a miracle," Sarah's mother said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. "He didn't ask to be here, but he is, and I won't let them take that life. Not while there's a chance, however small." Sarah's mother's words deeply moved Emily. She saw the pain, the love, and the despair in that woman's eyes. Emily knew that if she were in her place, she might make the same choice. But that didn't make the situation any less agonizing. With each passing day, the emotional burden on Emily grew heavier. She found herself struggling with her own feelings of helplessness while doing everything possible to keep Sarah and the baby safe. "If it were my baby, would I have the courage to risk everything to save it? Is Sarah's mother right? Am I doing enough?" Emily wondered, feeling the weight of every decision. And then, on one of those days when despair seemed about to overcome her, something incredible happened. As Emily stood by Sarah's side, watching the monitors as she did every day, she noticed a subtle change. Sarah's heart rate, which had been steady and slow, began to pick up slightly. Sarah's fingers, which had previously been still, moved again, this time with more force. Emily leaned closer, holding Sarah's hand with both of hers. "Sarah, if you can hear me, fight. Please, fight." Emily remembered a time, years ago, when she lost a patient who fought until the last moment. The emptiness she felt then was suffocating. She couldn't let that happen again. Not with Sarah. It was at that moment, between a sigh of hope and a silent prayer, that Sarah opened her eyes. Emily's world seemed to stop. The reality around her disappeared, leaving only her and Sarah, connected by an invisible thread of faith and resilience. Sarah's eyes were clouded, full of confusion, but alive. Emily felt a wave of emotions, relief, joy, and fear, all at once. Sarah opened her eyes, and in that instant, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same. But was she ready to face the truth? And are you prepared to discover what comes next? Because from here, everything changes. Stay with me, and together we will unravel the mysteries that destiny still holds. The first moments after Sarah opened her eyes were filled with confusion and uncertainty. Her eyes, still clouded by the coma, wandered the hospital room unfocused, while her weak body tried to adjust to the reality that awaited her. Emily was by her side, holding her hand firmly, a pillar of strength and support. But even as Sarah slowly returned to consciousness, the weight of what had happened began to seep into her mind, and what initially seemed like a miracle soon transformed into a harsh reality. Sarah, now aware that she was alive, began to ask questions. The answers came hesitantly, with Emily and the doctors carefully choosing their words. She was shocked to learn of James' death, her heart shattered by the pain of loss. And then, when she finally understood that she was pregnant, a wave of despair washed over her. How could she bring new life into the world when her own was falling apart? Worse still, the last memory she had of James was of a terrible fight they had on the day of the accident. He shouldn't have died like that, and I shouldn't be carrying this baby, Sarah thought, as silent tears slid down her face. She felt distant from the child in her womb, as if it were a constant reminder of what she had lost, a symbol of a love that ended tragically and abruptly. Emily, sensing Sarah's anguish, stayed by her side day after day. She became more than a nurse. She became a friend, a confidant. Emily shared stories of her own challenges, her struggles with loneliness, and how, somehow, she had found the strength to keep going. "You are not alone in this, Sarah. I know it seems impossible now, but you will find a way," Emily said, her voice soft and comforting. The bond between the two women grew stronger each day, nourished by long, sincere conversations. Sarah began to open up more, talking about her fears, her doubts, and the overwhelming guilt she felt for arguing with James before the accident. Emily listened patiently, always offering words of encouragement. "You can't change what happened, Sarah, but you can decide what to do from now on," she would say, reminding Sarah that despite everything, there were still choices to be made. When the time came to give birth, Sarah was emotionally exhausted. The childbirth, though physically and mentally draining, was accompanied by a painful calm. Emily was present the entire time, holding Sarah's hand, transmitting all the strength she could. When the baby was born, the fragile cry of the child filled the room, but for Sarah, the sound seemed distant, almost unreal. Sarah looked at the baby, her eyes filled with tears, but the feeling of connection she expected did not come. She felt empty, as if the child was a painful reminder of everything she had lost. "I can't be a mother," she said to Emily, her voice broken by grief. "Not now, maybe never." And with that decision, Sarah chose to give the baby up for adoption, believing it was the only way to move forward. Emily, though understanding the reason behind the decision, felt a pang in her heart. She knew that Sarah was acting out of trauma and feared that this choice would haunt her forever. Emily remembered her own childhood in the orphanage, the emptiness she felt watching other children being taken by new families while she was left behind. Will this child feel the same? Am I doing enough to help her? She wondered as she held Sarah's hand, trying to transmit all her strength. The years passed with a cruel swiftness, dragging along the hopes and dreams of a life without regrets. Sarah, always determined, found a new life, got married, and brought 2 more children into the world. She built a solid career, becoming a woman admired for her unbreakable strength and unwavering resilience. But despite all her accomplishments, there was a secret she could never fully bury. The past haunted her like an insidious ghost, always lurking in the quietest moments. The memory of the baby she gave up for adoption was an open wound, a shadow that followed her every step, reminding her of a missing piece of her soul. Her husband, a man with a kind heart and a watchful eye, was well aware of the demons that tormented Sarah. He saw the hidden sadness in her eyes, that pain she tried to mask behind forced smiles and apparent successes. Over time, the situation became unsustainable, and he knew something had to change. One day, with the same gentleness that always defined him, he encouraged her to face her deepest fears. "Sarah, you can't keep living like this," he said, his voice soft but firm. "You need to confront this unfinished chapter, or you'll never find the peace you're looking for." But something inside Sarah had already started to change even before that conversation. Years of suffering and restlessness had led her to seek answers that the world couldn't provide. Gradually, Sarah found solace in the Christian faith, a path she never imagined she would take. What started as occasional visits to church became her refuge, a sanctuary where she could pour out her pain and seek redemption. The Bible, once just a distant book, now became her daily companion, its pages filled with promises of healing and renewal. The transformation was slow but profound. Sarah became a woman of faith, devoted to God, and her life began to be guided by spiritual principles she had never known before. It was on this journey of faith that Sarah realized the only way to calm her soul was to confront the past that haunted her so deeply. Now, stronger and inspired by her connection with God, she decided it was time to find the child she had given up for adoption. The decision wasn't easy. The fear of being rejected haunted her, but her newfound faith gave her the courage she desperately needed. With every step of this painful journey, Sarah prayed that fate would be kind, that God would guide her in reuniting the lost pieces of her story. Resolute to finally face the demons that had haunted her for so many years, Sarah began her search, carrying with her a fragile hope and a renewed faith. The sleepless nights were filled with prayers and silent tears. She knew that the peace she sought could only be found in finding the one she had left behind. But the doubt that gnawed at her heart remained. Would the child she abandoned be ready to forgive her and welcome her back into his life? Determined to face the past, Sarah knew she would only find peace by reuniting the lost pieces of her story. But would the child she abandoned be ready to meet her? And you? Would you be ready to face the ghosts of the past? Stay with me to discover how this story will end. Time seemed to have dragged on as Sarah searched for the son she had given up for adoption years ago. Each attempt to locate him was accompanied by a mixture of hope and fear. She knew it would not be easy to confront the past, but she was determined to find the piece of herself she had lost. Sarah felt that only then could she finally close that painful chapter of her life. After weeks of tireless searching, Sarah finally got a solid lead. John, her son, had grown up in an orphanage, and although he was briefly adopted, he had returned to the system before reaching adulthood. Fate had led him back to the orphanage, where he spent most of his childhood and adolescence. The news was a painful blow to Sarah. The guilt of not being present in John's life consumed her, but at the same time, it rekindled a flame of determination within her. She knew she had to find him and, more than that, she had to win him over. Emily, who now worked at an orphanage, once again proved to be an indispensable friend. It was through Emily that Sarah learned the details of John's life. Emily revealed that John, although outwardly strong, carried a deep sadness. He always questioned why his biological mother had abandoned him. He believes he was rejected, Sarah. That thought has been with him since he was little, Emily said, her eyes reflecting the pain of watching John grow up with that wound. Sarah knew she couldn't just show up and expect John to accept her with open arms. He had his own life, his own scars. The first meeting between mother and son was tense, full of unspoken emotions and a caution that only those who have experienced great suffering can understand. Sarah saw in John the traits of James, the father he never knew, but she also saw something more, a pain that mirrored her own, a need for belonging that had never been fulfilled. In the following meetings, Sarah struggled to connect with John, but he maintained an emotional distance. She understood that this barrier was his defense, a way to protect an already wounded heart. "I know I wasn't the mother you deserved," Sarah said during one of the most difficult conversations she had ever had. "But I want, more than anything, to be a part of your life now, if you will let me." John looked at her, his eyes full of doubts and resentments accumulated over the years. "Why now?" he asked, his voice laden with pain. "Where were you when I needed you the most?" Sarah felt as if a knife had pierced her heart. She had no easy answers, only the truth of a woman who had fought to survive her own pain. "I was lost, John. I made terrible mistakes, and the greatest of all was not being there for you. But I never stopped thinking about you, and if I could go back in time, I would do everything differently." Despite the open wounds and difficult words, something began to change in John. He realized that, as much as he was hurt, Sarah's presence in his life was an opportunity for healing. He wasn't ready to fully forgive, but he felt he was taking the first steps toward it. Emily, always by their side, helped guide these conversations, offering a neutral perspective and a voice of reason amid the emotional storm. John, After one of the initial meetings, reflected on his feelings towards Sarah. He knew he should hate her, that he should keep his distance. But each time he saw her, that barrier in his heart began to crumble. Was he ready to forgive her? Could he allow himself to be loved? It was during a particularly quiet meeting, as they both watched the sunset, that John finally asked, "And now? What do we do from here?" The question, simple, carried within it the hope of a new beginning. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, replied, "We start from scratch. We rebuild what we lost. Together." Over time, John began to get closer to Sarah, and slowly, he got to know her new family. Sarah's husband welcomed him with a warmth that John did not expect, and his half-siblings, still children, looked at him with curiosity and affection. What started as sporadic meetings turned into regular visits. John, who always felt like an outsider in the world, began to feel that he finally belonged somewhere. John did not expect to be received with such warmth. Over the years, he had become accustomed to the idea that he would never belong to a family. But there, in that house full of laughter and love, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found his place. The most emotional moment came when, during a family gathering, John finally called Sarah a mom. The word came out with difficulty, almost as if it were a test, but seeing Sarah's emotional smile, he knew he had made the right decision. That simple gesture, so small and yet so significant, sealed what once seemed impossible. The reconciliation of a family that Sarah and John finally found the peace they had long sought. The scars of the past still existed, but now they were marks of overcoming, not of pain. The family, united, began to build new memories, leaving the past where it should be, behind. I looked at John and saw not just my son, but a reflection of everything I had lost and found again. The pain, the regret, it was all still there. But now, it was different. It was a reminder of how much I had grown, of how much love could heal, even when everything seemed lost, Sarah reflected as she looked at her gathered family. Emily, watching from afar, felt a deep satisfaction. As she watched the new family come together, Emily couldn't help but feel that something had changed within her as well. Perhaps, by helping Sarah and John, she had also healed part of her own pain. Love, after all, had the power to heal everyone, even those who helped mend broken hearts. Her work at the orphanage continued, and every time she saw a child, she remembered John, Sarah, and the hope she had helped restore. Love really can heal all wounds, she thought as a new day dawned. And so, after so many challenges, Sarah and John discovered that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. And you? Would you believe that even the most painful stories can have happy endings? Because in the end, we all deserve a second chance to be loved and to love. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story warmed your heart, like our video and subscribe to our channel to be notified whenever a heartwarming tale is on the air.